Council 100 honorees luncheon and lecture, and it's going to be a beautiful day outside and inside. The Council 100 exhibition and catalog this year are supported by the Fresno Art Museum's Council 100. Members and donors, especially Diane Hanson-Barnes, Pam and Gary Nelson, Joan Haas, and Harold and Janice Negosian. A complete list of the Council 100 members and donors is in the back of the catalog, honoring Martha Casanave's exhibition out in the lobby and down the concourse. You were all given a catalog before you came in the auditorium. Support for all of the exhibitions in the summer-fall 2023 exhibition season, including Martha Casanave's Council 100 exhibition, include Coke and James Hallowell, Paul Gibson and Joan Eaton, Christy Hicks, Carol Anderson, Bernice Wolfe, and David and Mary Ann Sagian. I would also like to acknowledge the catalog designer, who is one of our art instructors. Linda Zubsik is here with us today, and she did a beautiful job. Yeah. And I also would like to thank curator and membership director, Sarah Vargas and Craig Hamilton Arnold, for their editing of the catalog. And Martha's very happy with it, so we're very happy with it.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Every year for the past 33 years, the Fresno Art Museum's auxiliary membership group, the Council 100, selects an artist who is a woman, is over the age of 60, who has an established career, and who lives 100 miles outside of Fresno. This is a highly competitive selection process involving at least 6 nominated women artists, with only one chosen to be honored with a solo exhibition, the catalog, a lecture, and the luncheon, which we are celebrating today. I am happily the curator of Martha Casanave's exhibition. I am not a photography curator, but working with her closely, this was a wonderful process, and I really appreciated every minute of it. American photographer Martha Casanave is the 35th recipient of the Fresno Art Museum's Council 100 Distinguished Woman Artist Award. She is also a writer and educator, living and working in Monterey, California. Casanave was engaged with photography from early childhood and eventually established a portrait clientele in Monterey while continuing her personal work. Born in 1946, Martha Casanave has been one of the few women photographers in a male-dominated regional artistic circle that included Ansel Adams and Brett Weston. Her dedication to her career and contributions to the field of photography were strong factors in the Council 100 choosing to support her and honor her. The solo exhibition, Imaginings, Portraits, and False Flag, with its accompanying catalog, features 27 large-scale photographs focusing on 2 different photography projects. 12 black and white portraits of famous women and men of the art world, and 15 color prints of selections from her USSR project. Martha Casanave won the prestigious Imaging Cunningham Photography Award in 1979 and the Koret Israel Prize in 1988. Her work has been seen internationally as well as nationally, and she is in the collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. And with that accolade, I welcome Martha to the podium.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and very grateful to be here. Grateful to be nominated and awarded this award. Thank you. I'm going to start out my talk by talking for about 10 to 12 minutes. So you can take your eyes off the screen for the moment. Don't wait for it to change. It's not going to change for a few minutes. And then I'm going to show you some pictures on the screen for another 25 minutes. So it's a little bit longer than it was predicted, but there you have it. I'm going to start out with an excerpt from the memoir I'm working on. It's a memoir partially about me and partially about photography. And the tentative title is Girl Photographer. And this is based on a newspaper article that was written about me when I was 18 years old. And it read, I still have it, it's all yellow and stained, it read, "Childhood hobby grows with girl photographer." Okay, the characters in this excerpt are three people, myself, Gunther, and Francois. Now, Francois was an elderly, retired puppeteer by profession. And he lived out in Carmel Valley in a very simple, beautifully designed wooden house. And attached to it was a theater. And he showed every weekend, back in the good old days, he showed classic films. Let me see if this helps. No. During intermissions, he served coffee in little porcelain cups. He served it himself and created this wonderful community social hour there at the theater. Now, once I was out there and the breeze blew up his sleeves and I saw that he had these very interesting tattoos all up his arms. And I said, "Francois, I never knew you had tattoos. I knew him for a long time. He was one of my photographic subjects over many years." And he said, "Oh yes, and here and here." And I said, "You know, I've always wanted a tattoo. I've never found the right design or the right person. Could you introduce me?" He did. One movie evening, and this is an excerpt from my 1978 journal. Gunther, a stranger to me, but a friend of Francois, tried to conceal his consternation about doing such a complex, time-consuming tattoo. An Aztec stone carving representing a flower consisting of dots of descending size in many concentric circles. But when I insisted on choosing another design, something simpler, he wouldn't hear of it. All of Francois' tattoos down both arms and on chest and shoulders were also Aztec stone carving designs. Gunther, who considered himself an artist, never did the same tattoo twice. I had to choose something different. It was a hot, sultry, late summer evening in Francois' living quarters at Townmount Theater. First, Gunther traced the design on paper. Then from the paper onto a carving. Then he took me into the bathroom and shaved what looked to me like my already hairless upper arm, slowly, in a ritual manner. He wore only overalls. The tattoos on his arms and back were exposed. He pressed the carving to my arm with a wet cloth. We sat in a corner at a small table in Francois' sitting room under a single lamp. The rest of the room disappeared in darkness. Our legs and arms intertwined. My hand rested on his thigh. He traced the outline of the design and wiped off the carving. "There's hardly anyone left who makes tattoos by hand," he said, getting down to work. He uses a needle tied to a stick and a bottle of India ink. He learned the art in Soledad prison, where he did time for smuggling and selling drugs. He pulled the lamp closer to my arm. It was hot, and his hand, which held and stretched and grasped the flesh of my arm as he worked, was hot too. The hours passed in silence, except for the clicking sound of the needle as it punctured my skin, and the sound of crickets through the open doors and windows. Tiny beads of blood appeared. He kept wiping the excess ink and the beads of blood with a damp cloth he kept on his thigh by my hand. Tiny drops of sweat appeared on his face. Now and then he leaned back, wiped his forehead, stroked his mustache, took a deep breath or a sip of wine, or lit a cigarette, which he then didn't smoke. "How you doing?" he'd ask periodically. I watched the way the lamplight fell on his arms, clicking, wiping, clicking, wiping. As he filled in the design, my arm reddened and swelled. Francois, during a film showing, sat in his rocking chair across the room in the dark and said how beautiful we looked, leaning into each other under the lamplight. During the intermission, quiet conversations could be heard in the darkness around us. Someone approached the circle of illumination and silently, quietly watched. Clicking, wiping, clicking, clicking. Crickets singing. The beads of blood looked like little rubies. Gunther could no longer be called a stranger to me. We are irrevocably tied by this strangely intimate act. Our lives have barely touched, but this is forever. I feel that way about my portraits. I thought to myself, our paths cross in an intimate way and then diverge, but evidence of that meeting lasts forever. When he reached the last circle, over 3 hours later, the evening had cooled only imperceptibly. He looked up at me, broke into a smile, and said, "Coming home." Clicking, wiping, clicking. At last, he took me into the bathroom again and soaped and washed my arm, slowly and gently. Patted it dry and applied Vaseline. I should have felt more pain, but I was preoccupied with the process, the ritual, the intimacy, and now, the indelible product. Gunther had performed a 4-hour deed on my body that I would live with for the rest of my life. That's a tattoo to live up to, Peter Nabokov said when he saw it. 2 weeks later, Gunther performed Francois' last tattoo, the Aztec rain god on his right upper chest. I began to photograph them, but felt like an invader. I backed off and watched in the dark from the rocking chair in the corner. Now, why did I read you about the tattoo? Partially because it's how I feel about doing portraits, as I said. And that applies to analog photography. I don't think that same feeling applies to digital imaging, because digital imaging is really not permanent. As I have phased out doing photography, I'm often asked why I haven't gone digital like everyone else. Sometimes I feel guilty. My friend Beverly Rayner, a wonderful multimedia artist, has scolded me. She said, "Martha, just use the materials available to you." Other people, lots of them have said, it doesn't matter what you use. What matters is the final image. Dan Burkholder, the first person to make digital negatives, and the first person to make real art with the iPhone and start teaching iPhone workshops, told me, "Martha, just keep up with the damn times." These are all valid points. It's hard to argue with them. But for me, process matters. With both photography and my tattoo, the journey is just as important as the destination. I wanted a unique tattoo design performed by hand by an artist. And the tattoo itself has gotten blurry with time, I must say. But the memory of the process is still vivid. The process of making a photograph, of being in the dark room, of taking the people with me into the dark room, developing the film, making a print, seeing them materialize is just as important to me as the final picture. Jed Pearl, one of my favorite art critics, wrote in an article called The Chilliest Mystique. This was a review of 2 exhibits about art and the computer. In 2023, this came out in the New York Review of Books. I quote, "Artists, critics, curators, and museum goers who respond enthusiastically to these 2 shows will argue that for 20th and 21st century artists, a computer program, a Sony Portapack, or an iPhone is as legitimate a medium or tool as the lost wax process was for sculptors in ancient times, or oil paint in flexible tubes was for the 19th century landscape painter. I worry that the artists featured in these 2 shows, infatuated as they are with some new or new-ish medium, have confused means with ends." In 2018, Tim Wu, in an article called "The Tyranny of Convenience," wrote, "Climbing a mountain is different from taking the tram to the top, even if you end up at the same place." Okay, now, I'm going to start the picture show with a couple of my favorite cartoons. This is a historical selfie. The cameras I've used all my life have been few and pretty much all of them hand-me-downs. I started out at a very early age, and until the age of 12, these are so embarrassing, with the usual proverbial brownie, okay? And then, when I was 12, my uncle gave me this camera. I don't remember how old it was at the time when he gave it to me, because he had used it already for many years. This is a Rolleicord, a medium format camera, and on the right-hand side, you can see the ground glass. This is the kind of camera where you open the top and you look down and you see the magic image in the ground glass. So I was very intimidated, but I used this camera from the age of 12 to the age of 21, at which point I switched to 35 millimeter. By the way, this camera still works today. I'm sorry. There we are. My beloved Nikon. No battery. No battery. Battery-less Nikon and 3 lenses. It's, as you can see, it's kind of bashed at the top there. It's all battered. There's somebody's phone here. Is that what we show? I'm sorry. Okay. Then in 1982, I was given this camera. It started out with Ansel Adams, and then Ansel Adams gave it to his editor, and then eventually his editor traded it to me for prints. And it's a larger format, 4 by 5-inch sheet film camera that I also used the rest of my life. And then there's the simple pinhole box camera. This is the only camera I think that I've ever purchased brand new. Okay. And I'm just going to show you a couple of pictures from my recent shows. I just closed a show at the Monterey Museum of Art called Explorations. And the 2 opening pictures here are from the 2 rooms I had. One was the black and white work from Explorations along an imaginary coastline that featured a mysterious figure in 19th century garb, which is why I'm dressed the way I am. That was at the opening. And then the other room, using the same pinhole camera, was called Explorations along an urban coastline, and it was the tourist areas of Monterey around there. And I hand-colored those, just as I did in this show here. example of one of the black and white ones, the imaginary coastline, without the mysterious man. And this is what I look like working with that camera. I didn't allow myself to use a tripod, even though this camera has a tripod socket on the bottom and side. I didn't use a tripod. I gave myself the directive to put the camera only where a crab could go. So I put it on right on the sand and on the rocks and whatever. Then the mystery man appeared. This may remind you of work by David Caspar Friedrich, the painter, 19th century painter. The imaginary coastline came out in a book, available on Amazon. The urban coastline pictures, I did some indoors, some out. This is specimens at Hopkins Marine Station. I did use a tripod for some of these. For example, I had to put the camera on a tripod to get it high enough to put it right against the glass or plastic of a gumball machine. Now, what are the characteristics of pinhole photography? Why would you use pinhole photography when you can use a lens, other than as a plaything? Well, one interesting characteristic is its infinite depth of field, or focus. I put focus in quotes because there's no lens. It's not really sharp, but everything is in equal focus from the front of the camera to infinity. It's because it doesn't have a lens, it can be very fuzzy depending on the size of the pinhole. Time dilation, because the aperture is so tiny, your exposures are very long, so you can make double images, triple images, ghost images. You can make moving water look like cotton candy. Excuse me. Any number of things because the exposure is so long. Wide-angle distortion. The shorter the focal length of your box, the more distortion you get, just like with a wide-angle lens. And this really helps with pinhole photography. Real advantage, it's cheap, it's simple, you can put it on the ground, you can get hit by a wave, you can get covered with dirt, and it still works. It's magical. Why is it magical? Because it is so unpredictable. It's like when you develop the film, it's like opening a present. It's just, magical. Well, all of photography is magical to me. One thing it's not is obsolete. My pinhole camera will never go obsolete. Okay, so I'm going to show you the portraits in this show here are individual portraits of fairly well-known people in photography and the arts. And I'm going to show you another lifelong project I've had is photographing the same individuals or families, about 10 or 12 of them, I've never counted exactly, over many years, 30 to 40 years. So I'm going to show you some excerpts of a few of these. Portrait photography is very, very complicated, and the reason why there's fewer portrait photographers than there are landscape is that it's just very anxiety-producing, okay? And Roland Barthes says this about portrait photography. The portrait photograph is a closed field of forces. In front of the lens, I am at the same time the one I think I am, the one I want others to think I am, the one the photographer thinks I am, and the one he makes use of to exhibit his art. And believe me, it really is that complicated. Then we come to posing. Now, in my sequential portraits, my subjects learned how, with time and repeated efforts, they learned how to pose for me. I call this, they learned how to assume a certain camera persona. Barthes also says, now, once I feel myself observed by the lens, everything changes. I constitute myself in the process of posing. I instantaneously make another body for myself. I transform myself in advance into an image. Now, when I work with my sequential people over the years, they respond to how I respond. When I'm photographing someone, if I like what they're doing or something like that, I go, oh, yeah, that's good. So they hear that. And also my editing. When I give them a print or two from the sitting, which is my choice, they see what I like. And so the next time I photograph them, they assume some of the same kinds of poses. That's what I mean by camera persona. Now, one thing that everyone does, just about when posing for a photograph, is to smile. And you don't want, in a very serious portrait, you really don't want to have smiles, the say cheese smile. The say cheese smile is for snapshots.
Mm-hmm.
Catherine and Amelia Ward, I'm going to start with them as infants, even though I knew their mom in high school, so I started out photographing her in high school, and then I photographed her wedding, I photographed her pregnant, and then the kids when they were born. Here they are growing up. With mom. High school, prom dress.
You need Mike?
Mike.
Let me go get him. There he is.
Did I push something?
Here we go. Thank you, Mike.
I don't know what I did. Elegant young ladies. These were done in my studio. And then they both got married and had their own kids.
Uh-oh. Mike.
Hi. What is he pushing? Mike, maybe you should just stay up here.
Yeah. Sit on the stairs.
Yolanda Alexander and Nathan Majette, 1975 to 2009. She had a baby, was a single mom. The father didn't stay with her. They moved around a lot, and here they are packing up, getting ready to move to another place. She had another baby by another guy who didn't stay with her. Masha Ludmila and Henry Ellenson, I will probably call him Garik, which is short for Harry in Russian. They were part of my project of Jewish emigres from the Soviet Union. But they were so photogenic, and also Garik was an artist, and so we just made friends, and I photographed all of them individually and together over many years. This is Masha at about 10 years old, just a few years after they had arrived from the Soviet Union. This is some of Garik's artwork in the background. This is her mom, Lucia Ludmila. got married and had a daughter, Katya. And they moved away, so I wasn't able to photograph them very often, but she came to visit. And here's Katya as a young woman. All of those and the pictures that are in this show here at the museum are in my book, Trajectories, a half-century of portraits. Egad, half-century. Also available on Amazon. So now I'm going to show you talk about the Russian work. These were all done with this camera. And the lens that is on it right now, which is, I think, a 24mm lens, that's what I used for most of these pictures, to get a slight distortion, because that contributed to the sort of uneasy feeling of some of these. I took American photographers to the Soviet Union every year for about 10 years. And one of my obligations, of course, was to take them out on photo forays on the streets. And that's not something I do. I'm not a street photographer. Nevertheless, I had to do it, and I took some pictures. But I didn't know what to do with them. Every once in a while, I would get out the contact sheets, go through them, put marks on ones that I liked, and then put them away, because I just couldn't develop a point of view. I mean, you know, if I were to print up a bunch of photographs of Russia, people would think that I was trying to tell them what Russia is like, or what the Soviet Union was like. And I knew I couldn't do that, even with my background and my language. I couldn't do that. I majored in Russian in college, but I still felt like Russia, Soviet Union then, Russia now, is the proverbial layered onion. You just peel one layer off and then there's a surprise. So I didn't feel I could tell my viewers anything substantial about the Soviet Union. So I tried an idea generating technique, which I'm sure most of you know, and it has various names. I called it clustering. I did keep my original big piece of newsprint with all of my ideas on it, but I can't find it. I put it in a safe place. So I tried to recreate more or less what I did with those ideas. And you can see some of the ideas that came up. Starting in the middle with the Soviet Union. So the idea of blood and fire and flood, violence, and then down at the bottom, the idea of illusion and facade and Potemkin village. Have you guys heard of the phrase Potemkin village? In 1787, Catherine the Great's lover and favorite, Grigory Potemkin, this might be a myth, but he is said to have built facades of fake villages in Russia, where she traveled and took foreign visitors to impress the visitors. So they weren't real, but this phrase came into our language to mean a facade behind which there is nothing. So this all gave me the idea to try painting my images in the wrong colors. So this is what I ended up using. I tried various things that didn't work for me very well, but then I ended up with a fairly good set of oil pastels, and these are the other things I used to do the work. The mixture of oil and turpentine that you have to coat the print with first, and then all the cotton balls and the Q-tips and all of that. And then I felt, well, you know, okay, this will work. At the same time, I came across an article by George Kennan, a diplomat and Soviet specialist, who wrote, "The political world, in this political world, artificially created images are considered more significant than realities." Well, I like that. You know, I said, okay, at least mine are pretty honest because I'm doing it on purpose. You know? same time, I was reading a novel by Andrei Bielik. It came out in 1905. Russian artist, symbolist writer. It was called Petersburg. And it's a time when Russia was gearing up for revolution. The novel is full of confusion between reality and appearances. It's uncertainty and fragmentation and mirror images, illusions, reflections, and lurid colors, reds and orange, fiery reds and oranges, and icky greens. The translator said in the introduction, "We find no anchor in the world of this novel. We never know where we ought to stand on any given question." I said, yeah, that's about how I feel when I'm in Russia. So I think I'm just going to run through a bunch of these images without commentary, but I hope cumulatively you'll feel that this sort of tension between revealing and concealing, of illusion. And there's a bunch of pictures in here that show table settings, food settings on tables, which is a kind of theater. Theater is another theme that came up because it's a facade, it's a displaying but also concealing. Suggestions of violence, the unexpected, weird sky colors. So I think I'll just run through these. Many of these are in this show, but there's a lot that are not. Michelle didn't want this one in the show. Why not, Michelle? Here are a couple of images colored two different ways. One a little more realistic than the other, but of course I chose the red one. This shows a wedding palace. The book there, it says the act of marriage. The Soviet Union was atheistic. Religion was not allowed. So you had to go to the registrar to get married. The painting says, anti-material material consists of antiparticles. I did a lot of coloring of marble statuary it's sort of off-putting for us, but actually ancient statuary really was colored. Here's an example from a magazine article about that very topic. And this is a sample of what they think an ancient statuary, how it was colored. They used microscopic little flakes of color and paint that they found on these ancient statues and then recreated what they might have looked like, which to us looks weird. Here's unpainted Mother Russia, and then painted Mother Russia. I drew in, or inked in an eyeball, even gave her eyes with eyeballs. There's an overheated man in a boiler room. And here's me out in the cold. I want to conclude by saying that this work still resonates for me because Russia today has so many similarities with Russia of then, Soviet Union of then. Historically, Russia is and always was full of secrets and misdirections, perhaps even more now with the internet. Martha Casanave, commentator and writer who grew up in the Soviet Union, said in 2013, shortly before Russia occupied Crimea, she said, or wrote, Russians have told so many lies about themselves they hardly know who they are anymore. The fact that this work is ambiguous makes it more artful than documentary. I found a point of view that fit me as an artist, not as a photojournalist, which is something I could never be. The work could be seen as not about Russia at all, but as a metaphor for my whole life, or perhaps yours. Thank you. That's the consequence of having a big thumb.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to have lunch at 12:30, but there are a few minutes to meet with Martha out in her exhibition. You can find your way to the garden and grab a seat, and we'll have lunch at 12:30. And Martha's accessible during lunch, too, if you want to pop over to her table and talk to her. So thank you for being with us. See you in the garden.